The chairman of the President's Commission investigating the Challenger disaster told NASA today that the agency's decision-making process is flawed and added bluntly, you eliminate the element of good judgment and common sense. Former Secretary of State William Rogers made the comments after the shuttle manufacturers, Rockwell International, testified they had warned NASA that they could not assure that Challenger was safe to fly because of an ice buildup. Then NASA's #2 man in the shuttle program, Arnold Aldridge, said he rejected that warning. The warning came from the president of Rockwell's Space Division, Rocco Petrone.
But we felt it was an unknown condition. I then called my two program managers who were in Florida at 5:45. And I said, we cannot recommend launching from here. From what we see, we think the tiles would be endangered. We had a very short conversation because they had a meeting to go to. I said, let's make sure we have the NASA understand that we, Rockwell, feel it's not safe to launch.
A NASA inspection team told the commission that the ice buildup on the Challenger was the worst they'd ever seen, with icicles up to 4 feet long, but they did not regard the ice as a safety problem. Charlene?
In the Philippines, the new cabinet took up its duties today.
And other parts into the Atlantic Ocean near the coast of the United States. The spacecraft, called Cosmos 1714, was not manned and did not carry a nuclear power pack.
In Nashville...
And we focus first tonight on the new evidence in the Shuttle Challenger inquiry. Today, the shuttle manufacturer, Rockwell International, raised more questions among members of the President's Commission about NASA's decision-making process. And a NASA employee appeared to confirm that the shuttle explosion was caused by the failure of a seal in the right rocket booster. Once again, correspondent Elizabeth Brackett covered the Commission's hearings.
Charles Stevenson, a member of NASA's ICE team, was called before the Presidential Commission to tell the members about the large buildup of ice on the launch pad before the Challenger takeoff. But as he went through pictures of the launch, he told them much more.
Charlie, this may not be your field, but there's looks like a little puff of smoke off on the right-hand side there. Is that, can you describe that for us?
Yes, sir, that is puff of smoke that has been released before to the press and to the world.
Have any of you made any interpretation of these pictures as far as the weather is concerned?
Not as far as the weather is concerned.
Do you have any other conclusions there?
Well, our conclusion would be speculation based on, but if you want that, I'll speculate.
Well, go ahead.
Engineers don't like to speculate, but based on our photos data, and we've analyzed all the photos, we feel that that's a leak. May or may not be related to temperature, and we feel it's coming out of the most likely spot is the joint between the aft booster and the aft segment.
And this is the right booster?
This is the right booster, yes, sir.
NASA had previously released pictures of a puff of smoke, but had not pinpointed the location or the possible cause of the smoke. And even Commission members had not seen this picture. B.K. Davis, a second member of the ICE team, was specific in response to questions from astronaut Sally Ride.
I was wondering to what extent you've been able to localize the origin of the smoke on the photographs. Can you pin it down to a 1 square foot area or 5 square feet or 12 square feet? Just how close can you do that photographically now?
I can say that it looks to me, my personal observation of it, that it is inboard of the connection of the lower strut between the SRB and the ET.
How sure are you of that? What are your error bars on that? Can you say that within, you know, within a couple feet or within a couple inches, or?
We'll say it's within a foot of the joint, and it's at 300 degrees.
This detailed location again confirmed the theory that a seal on the right-hand booster rocket had failed shortly after liftoff. That suspected failure beginning a series of events that caused the Challenger to explode. Davis also all but ruled out a competing theory as to the cause of the disaster, a leak in the external fuel tank.
There have been, as you know, stories that somehow a hydrogen leak on the external tank might have been a cause of this accident. So far, you found no evidence to that effect at all? No, sir. I can't support even a consideration of it.
In another surprising development, commission members heard that a second major contractor had recommended against launching the Challenger. It was known that Morton Thiokol, the contractor for the solid rockets, had at one point opposed the launch. Today, executives from Rockwell, the contractor that builds the shuttle's orbiter, said they too wanted the launch stopped. Rockwell was worried about ice on the launch pad damaging the orbiter.
So we cannot recommend launching from here. From what we see, we think the tiles would be endangered. We had a very short conversation because they had a meeting to go to. So let's make sure we have the NASA understand that we, Rockwell, feel it's not safe to launch.
At the 9 o'clock meeting, I was asked by Arnie Aldrich, program manager, to give him the results of our analysis, and I essentially told him what I just told you and felt that we did not have a sufficient database to absolutely assure that nothing would strike the vehicle, so we could not lend our 100% credence, if you will, to the fact that it was safe to fly.
When Mr. Patrone made his statement, he didn't use the words 100% sure. I suppose nothing is 100% sure.
I didn't use those words either, I'm sorry, sir.
But you just said you did.
I paraphrased that, and I shouldn't have done
Why don't you testify what you said, please?
I said I could not predict the trajectory that the ice on a mobile launch platform would take at SRB ignition. And that was the end of it.
But I think NASA's position probably would be was that they thought that you were satisfied with the launch. Did you convey to them in a way that they were able to understand that you were not approving the launch from your standpoint?
I felt that by telling them we did not have a sufficient database and could not analyze the trajectory of the ice, I felt he understood that Rockwell was not giving a positive indication that we were for the launch.
Had Rockwell ever taken that position before on previous launches when the launch had occurred?
No, this is the first time where we've been in a position where we really had no database from which to make a judgment. And this is the first time that Rockwell has taken an unsafe to fly position.
The question is very simple. Are you go or are you no-go for launch? And maybe isn't an answer. I hear all kinds of qualifications and cautions and considerations here. Did someone ask you, are you go or no-go? That's not asked.
So much of it's how the question gets phrased. We had heard earlier we had to work, aspiration work, ricochet work, a number of things, which we did, and then we came up with our recommendation.
And your recommendation now, you say, it was unsafe to fly.
Correct, sir.
When they resumed the count, you knew that your recommendation essentially had been either considered and overruled or dispositioned in some way.
That's right, sir.
And subsequent to that point in time, were there any other, did you take any other opportunities to, through yourself or your people, to express your opinion again?
Mr. Armstrong, I felt we had expressed our opinion to the proper level, on the proper occasion of the meeting that had been set up for it. I felt I had done all I could do.
But NASA's Arnold Aldrich, one of the three top decision makers in the launch decision chain, had a different version of the Rockwell recommendation.
My interpretation of the input that was made to me in the mission management team meeting that I described is that a concern was voiced, and it was not an objection to launch. And I think the people that were in that meeting from Rockwell intended to offer me that concern, but they did not intend to ask me not to launch.
Well, we'll get to that. That's what when you finish, it seems to me that's, at least to me, the important point. If the decision-making process is such that the prime contractor thinks he objected and testified under oath that they took a position it was unsafe to launch, and you say that was not our understanding, that shows a serious deficiency in the process.
Let me explain to you why I'm talking about these previous TPS damages.
What I'm going to lead up to was a discussion of another condition we had on the external tank this past year, where several of the external tanks had material coming off them, their insulation material, and damaging the orbiter during the launch phase. And that was of great concern to the program, and corrective actions were taken, but we continued to fly with tanks with that condition, with a repair fix.
Well, I just want to express personal unhappiness with this development, because we've been dealing with NASA now for some time, 2 or 3 weeks, and we ask everyone to be forthright, to tell us anything that they knew that might relate to this in any way, whether it was damaging or not. And I, maybe through some fault of the commission, we hadn't heard about Rockwell's position until 2 or 3 days ago. I'm a little surprised it wasn't volunteered. Because certainly they're the prime contractor, and their testimony this morning, whether you accept it exactly as stated or not, still is a very significant testimony, and I'm really surprised and disappointed that we didn't know about it earlier.
Mr. Chairman, I've discussed this subject of the ICE team with the commission on 3 occasions.
Not about Rockwell's position.
On the second occasion, in the executive office building, on the first closed hearing, I in fact reviewed in a much briefer summary this meeting, and I believe you asked if someone from Rockwell International had expressed a concern with the launch, and I reported this situation precisely so. That is, Rockwell had a concern with that issue. I would think it was more than reasonable that if someone were still concerned that this was a very bad judgment or a bad action to take, they would call me, and I left every opportunity for that to happen.
I suppose it's unfair to ask you, but suppose that call had been made, is it conceivable you might have changed your mind?
If Rockwell had told me that they were no-go, I would have reported you the same manner that George Hardy reported in discussion. I would not have overruled a no-go discussion from the Rockwell team.
In the afternoon, 3 other top launch decision-makers joined Aldridge. They were again questioned on the agency's seeming inability to get critical information to the top.
Would you have expected this problem to have been brought up to level 2?
Well, I will answer from my perspective. I think looking back on everything and the amount of discussion that went on, even though the people decided it was judgmental, they thought it had been put to bed, I would have thought it would have been brought to level 2, if you want my honest opinion.
No, sir, I can assure you that if we had had that information, we wouldn't have launched, if it had been 53 degrees.
I don't think it's necessary to continue this discussion on the decision-making process. You'll remember that I did say at one point that we thought the decision-making process may be flawed. I believe I'm speaking for the whole commission when I say that we think it is flawed. And I think probably you gentlemen will agree with us on that the process as it worked in this case was clearly flawed, because the recommendations that were made were not fully understood by you or not conveyed to you.
So NASA emerges from this round of public hearings with a reputation that has suffered serious damage. Critical questions have been raised in public as to the safety of the hardware the agency chose to use. Equally critical questions have been raised about the agency's decision-making process. While the exact cause of the Challenger accident has not yet been made clear, what is clear is that NASA will have a great deal more than equipment to repair before the shuttle flies again.
William Rogers of the Presidential Shuttle pronounced NASA's decision-making process flawed. Today, officials of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center struck back. Lynn Scher reports.
It's as if they were saying, no, William Rogers, you're wrong. We didn't make a mistake in deciding to launch Challenger that morning.
I'm not sure what Mr. Rogers means in terms of the decision process being flawed. I do not believe that the decision process that I know and understand to be flawed.
Based on the data that we had up to January the 27th and through the launch count up until the liftoff occurred on January 28th, that all the actions were proper.
As for the rubber seal, suspected by some as the cause of the accident,
we thought that the problem was acceptable and did not endanger the safety of flying.
But for all their avowed reliance on data and testing, it's clear from this week's hearings that NASA launched without the facts, that they sent 7 astronauts into space in a machine that had not been tested at the weather conditions on Earth that day.
We didn't have enough information that we could quantify the effect of the cold.
We had a problem with temperature, and it was away from the direction of goodness, and that's my phrase, because I can't quantify it.
We did not have a database from which to draw any conclusions for this particular situation.
NASA wouldn't launch if the outdoor temperature fell below 31 degrees. That's because the system, including the solid rocket boosters, was supposed to be usable in that cold. But Morton Thiokol had never test-fired their rockets below 40 degrees, and they had no data on how cold the rocket joints could be. Calculations indicate the joint on the right rocket was 29 degrees at liftoff. Today, outgoing shuttle director Jess Moore was asked why they launched without all that data.
That's a very good question, and I think that's a question that's got to be answered.
And at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, 1,100 workers were laid off today, the second wave of casualties from the explosion. Lynn Scher, ABC News, Washington.
NASA officials today strongly denied the charge by the Challenger Commission that their decision-making process was flawed. Yesterday, William Rogers, chairman of the commission investigating the disaster, rebuked the space agency for launching the shuttle in spite of warnings from 2 manufacturers that it was unsafe. Rogers said the decision-making process was clearly flawed and eliminated good judgment and common sense. 5 NASA officials at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, said they disagreed, and the center's director, William Lucas, said the decision to launch was sound.
I'm not sure what Mr. Rogers means in terms of the decision process being flawed. I do not believe that the decision process that I know and understand to be flawed. The process of delegating to various levels in the program the responsibility to make decisions within their own purview and within the pre-established guidelines, as long as that does not affect another level, I believe that that is a reasonable process. Throughout the whole history of NASA, we have made decisions at various levels. There are just hundreds of decisions that have to be made every day in preparing for a launch and in executing a launch, and it's impossible for all of those to come to the top. So I believe the pyramiding of decision-making process to be a sound process.
Marshall's Deputy Director for Science and Engineering, George Hardy, was asked what he thought about the Commission's performance thus far. Some of you may have been able to judge their fairness, he said. I may have something to say about that when they finish. We turn now to a major look at where the Shuttle Challenger investigation has left the credibility of NASA, long one of the country's most admired and least doubted institutions. 1 month after the shuttle disaster, the Presidential Commission still has no official explanation for what went wrong. But it has succeeded in putting NASA under the critical spotlight as never before, and one of the casualties has been NASA's image of infallibility. We start with a report by Elizabeth Brackett on the ongoing investigation.
By the end of another full week of testimony, the Presidential Commission had come to a harsh and unhappy conclusion.
You'll remember that I did say at one point that we thought the decision-making process may be flawed. I believe I'm speaking for the whole commission when I say that we think it is flawed.
That conclusion came after commission members had listened to witness after witness say they had tried to get the message to stop the launch of the Challenger through NASA's chain of command. One of the first to say that was an engineer from Morton Thiokol, the contractor that makes the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. Alan McDonald had wanted his superiors to understand that he thought it was too cold to launch.
And I was absolutely surprised that NASA would accept any recommendation below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, especially when the predicted temperature is as low as 26 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, I made the direct statement that if anything happened to this launch, told him I sure wouldn't want to be the person that had to stand in front of a board of inquiry to explain why I launched this outside of the qualification of the solid rocket motor.
But NASA manager Larry Malloy said he hadn't heard the deep concern expressed by the Thiokol engineers. What he had heard, he said, was engineers voicing theoretical concerns they couldn't back up with data.
I didn't hear a single engineer say it's unsafe to fly a 51L. What I heard those engineers saying
was talking to their data. They were talking to their data, and they were talking to their lack of data, and they were given engineering opinion, which they have stated that they cannot quantify.
Thiokol engineers said they knew they were unable to give NASA or their own management the backup data they wanted. They couldn't, they said. It had never been that cold on launch day before.
I was asked to quantify my concerns, and I said I couldn't. I couldn't quantify it. I had no data to quantify it, but I did say I knew that it was away from goodness in the current database.
To some commissioners, it seemed that management at NASA and Thiokol had become so obsessed with detailed data, they had missed the forest for the trees. Chairman Rogers.
The trouble with so much paperwork, you eliminate the element of good judgment and common sense.
Commission members also came down hard on NASA for not passing the concerns they did hear about the launch up the management chain.
If this were an airplane, an airliner, and I just had a 2-hour argument with Boeing on whether the wing was going to fall off or not, I think I'd tell the pilot, at least mention it. Why didn't we escalate a decision this important?
I did, sir.
You did?
Yes, sir.
Tell me what levels above you knew.
As I stated earlier, Mr. Reinertz, who is my manager, was at the meeting.
Malloy's boss, Stan Reinhardt's, said the information had stopped with him. It was the kind of decision he felt it was his job to make. But a parade of his superiors all said if they had known of the depth of the engineers' concerns, they would have acted differently.
So I can assure you that if we had had that information, we wouldn't have launched.
When officials of a second major contractor testified that they too had opposed the launch, NASA's decision-making process became even more suspect. Rockwell International said because of the enormous amount of ice on the launch pad that cold morning, they could not guarantee the safety of the flight.
So let's make sure that the NASA understand that we, Rockwell, feel it's not safe to launch.
This time, the information did go up the chain of command. The number 2 man on the launch decision team said he heard Rockwell's concerns, but he did not interpret them to mean no launch.
And I think the people that were in that meeting from Rockwell intended to offer me that concern, but they did not intend to ask me not to launch.
The decision-making process is such that the prime contractor thinks he objected and testified under oath that they took a position it was unsafe to launch, and you say that was not our understanding. That shows a serious deficiency in the process.
By week's end, it was clear that the Commission also had concerns about the hardware decisions NASA had made. The ill-fated Challenger flew with seals on its solid rocket boosters NASA had been warned about for years.
We recognized that we might get some erosion. We also recognized that it was a low-frequency event.
Astronaut Sally Ride, cool and precise through most of the week's testimony, seemed shocked that NASA would fly knowing of a problem with a part that had a Criticality 1 classification. By NASA's own definition, a failure in a Criticality 1 part means the loss of the mission, vehicle, and crew.
You know, what we've seen in the chart so far is that the data was inconclusive, so you said go ahead. That sounds to me like you were willing to accept damage to a Criticality 1 system.
But in later testimony, the top man at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center said mission safety did not depend on the booster rocket seals.
I was aware that the seals were Criticality 1 in terms of the program, as well as many other things, but I had never considered the seals as a threat to flight safety because I thought adequate margin was available.
But in stunning testimony yesterday, a NASA employee for the first time backed up the leading theory that a faulty seal may have been the cause of the Challenger explosion. Launch technician Charles Stevenson was asked to speculate on the meaning of a puff of smoke seen in new pictures that he presented to the Commission.
Based on our photo data, and we've analyzed all the photos, we feel that that's a leak. May or may not be related to temperature, and we feel it's coming out of the most likely spot is the joint between the aft booster and the aft segment.
Even as the commission came closer to pinpointing the cause of the explosion, questions about the process remained. At week's end, the commission still felt NASA had not come up with a clear answer to the basic question, why launch, when there were so many reasons not to.
Today, NASA responded by strongly denying that its decision-making process was flawed and asserting that the decision to launch the Challenger on January 28th was sound. Correspondent Tom Bearden has this report.
The Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville has the primary responsibility for the shuttle's solid rocket booster system, and it's the actions of the officials who work here that have been the most seriously questioned. NASA made 5 of them available today, including Lawrence Malloy, the chief of the Booster Rocket Office. He was grilled about NASA's decision-making process by the Presidential Investigating Commission earlier this week, a process he continues to defend.
I think in relation to the solid rocket booster project, we thought back about our decision process and going into the 51L launches, as well as the decision process that we have used for previous launches. And as far as my actions relative to 51L, all the proper processes were followed, and I don't believe there was any flaw in those processes. Now, I think part of the a conclusion that has been drawn is that somehow in that process we had reversed a role of looking at let's prove we're ready to fly, as opposed to one that says, prove to me, since you raised this concern, you prove to me that I can't fly. And I categorically deny that, and I disagree with it.
Were the concerns raised by Thiokol's engineers and the discussion and examination of that data any different than the kind of process that's occurred before? Was there anything unusual about this discussion?
Only the timing. The content of the discussion, the level of detail that was gone into in the discussion, the probing of the conclusions that were being drawn by myself and other people involved in that telecom, totally typical.
In retrospect, is there anything about this process you feel needs to be changed now?
Well, I thought about the conclusion that Chairman Rogers and other members of the commission are drawing, that there should be some change in process. And if I just look at the unique things that have come forth as a result of the commission hearings, the change in process is not a matter of how things are handled at the top. I think the change in process has to occur as to how engineers who have concerns, to the extent that they will write a memo that says that the shuttle should stop flying until a certain thing is done, that needs to be communicated up the line starting there. It never made it even to Thiokol management in that case, and certainly didn't get to my element manager or to me. And what is more disturbing is that opinion never was made known to the Marshall engineers who are working on this task team, who were aimed at improving the performance of that joint and reducing the incidence of erosion and blowback. And that task team is just for that kind of an interchange.
Do you think NASA is getting a fair hearing at this point, and do you bear any animosity, or what are your feelings toward the gentlemen from Thiokol who have expressed the testimony that they have given?
Okay, answer the first question first. I think we've been given ample opportunity to communicate at the commission hearings what our beliefs are relative to the facts and communicate what the process was that we followed. I have been somewhat disappointed in my inability to do that on a couple of occasions. We have spent a lot of time trying to explain the redundancy in the joint versus the time that it isn't redundant, and I'm disappointed in my ability to be able to communicate clearly such that I can get a reaction from the commission that says, I understand what you're saying, however, I disagree with you. That has been a disappointment. Now, relative to the more dramatic statements that have been attributed to Thiokol personnel in the press, when I first see those type of things in the press, it tends to be disturbing, but then when you talk to the individuals, they usually didn't say that precise thing, and I find that to be the truth, so I don't think that's been of any particular concern to me.
Today's series of interviews are the first one-on-one media contact that NASA has permitted with key shuttle officials since the disaster. Their stated reason for allowing them to occur now is that the officials have already testified before the Presidential Investigating Commission. But some NASA spokesmen admit privately there is also a public relations aspect to all of this, that NASA is trying to repair some of the damage done to its public image by the intensive scrutiny of the Washington hearings.
Now for some insight into the effects these charged shuttle hearings have had on relatives of the 7 astronauts who died in the Challenger explosion. Mike Smith was the pilot on last month's fatal flight. Like his late brother, Pat Smith was also a one-time Navy pilot. He joins us tonight from Raleigh, North Carolina. Mr. Smith, were you surprised by the information that came out in this week's shuttle hearings?
No, I don't think surprised. A little disappointed, but not surprised.
Was there anything in there that particularly disturbed you about what you heard?
No, I don't have any problem with the process. Possibly with the lack of communication. Communication not getting as far as it should go.
Mm-hmm. Why weren't you surprised?
Well, this type thing is not unusual in any large corporation outside of the government, and I don't expect it to be any different in the government.
Well, had you ever talked with your brother about this kind of thing? I mean, was there any indication from him that he had any concerns about this decision-making process and about the safety and so on?
No, I believe that the entire astronaut crew, and I think that they would go along with this, have always put 100% confidence in the management of NASA. So safety, I don't think any of them ever wanted any guarantees, but they all believed that the top NASA management put safety first, and as far as when the thing left the pad, they felt like that NASA management had done everything possible to ensure safety.
After listening to these testimonies this week, has your own opinion of NASA changed significantly?
No, it hasn't. I feel like that the process that they use is a good process. I feel like that we need to look at this a little bit further than what we've looked, and maybe see what kind of pressure was being put on NASA from top management right on down, from people higher than NASA, from the government itself, to make this a paying proposition. Quite possibly the pressure was not obvious even to the people, even to the top management of NASA. It might have been a subconscious type thing, but I feel like that there was some pressure being put on these people to perform, and maybe this led to a little bit of what went on.
What about your family, Mike's family, his wife, his children? How has this testimony, if they've listened to it at all, affected their attitudes?
It's just a matter of disappointment that if in fact it does come out that somebody made a decision having full knowledge of the decision, rather than the decision being made without having the complete data, then there's going to be a real strong element of disappointment. As far as bitterness, there's no need in being bitter, because nothing's going to bring him back. So bitterness is not really there, but I believe that there's probably a little bit of element of disappointment if in fact it turns out that there was a decision made knowing that we were going to launch outside of parameters.
Is it being discussed in the family, these hearings?
Not really, no.
You said in the first few days after the accident that you thought the shuttle program should be continued. Has any of what's come out in this past week made you feel any differently?
No, if you'll analyze what's come out, if it turns out to be an O-ring seal problem, that's a fix. There's no problem with that. If it turns out that maybe the whole manned space program is being put under a little bit too much pressure to become a profitable entity, then maybe we need to back up a little bit and say, hey, look, the safety of these astronauts is what's most important. If we can't guarantee the safety of the astronauts and satisfy the government, then we need to look at it from a different standpoint. But we need to have safety first, and if that doesn't make it a paying entity, then we need to look at it from a different standpoint.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smith. Robin?